Hi, welcome back to Digital Defense. My name is Jordan Robertson. I'm a cybersecurity reporter with Bloomberg News here in Washington, D.C. This is our weekly cybersecurity show. It's an audience-driven show, so please feel free to send us any questions. We're broadcasting live now on Facebook, Periscope, and the Terminal and the Bloomberg.com. Please feel free to leave any comments, in the comment section below, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can, or tweet to us at Technology, which is the Bloomberg Technology webpage. It's been quite a week, in terms of Russian election hacking, with the testimony today of former FBI Director Jim Comey, and it's almost easy to forget that the week began with another Russia election-related bombshell, related to the leak of classified information from the National Security Agency regarding the scope of Russian efforts to influence the presidential election. It's a topic we've talked a lot about on this show, but today I want to take you deep on one specific area which concerns, broadly, how do you know if the Russians tampered with your vote or your voter registration? There's been a lot of discussion about what the hackers did or didn't do last year in regard to potentially helping Donald Trump or hurting Hillary Clinton. But one of the really interesting and one of the most relevant things for the average viewer, of the show would be, well, what were my records tampered with at all? So I want to walk you through what was disclosed this week and provide some tips and some pointers on how you can check. There's some very basic things you can do just to check to see if your records were at all altered. So we'll start with the leak of this week. There was, earlier this week, a young 25-year-old defense intelligence analyst, former Air Force linguist, and on assignment to the National Security Agency, was arrested for allegedly leaking this document to a news organization called The Intercept, which has been publishing Edward Snowden's documents. Basically what this document does was, is a classified NSA document describing the breadth of Russian election hacking efforts. And one of the slides is really interesting. I mean, this shows the pathways that the attackers used to attack U.S. election systems. And what I want to focus on specifically today is when the attackers got to that end phase, the target space, as they call it here, the NSA document describes at least 122 different election-related officials who were targeted, as part of this campaign, which the U.S. government attributes to Russian military. That's the GRU. You can't see it here, but that's what that is. And these targets, these 122 targets, were local, county and state voter registrar voters. So, county and state, organizations that manage the voter registration databases for their localities. And the relevance to all of us in that is, these hackers aren't accessing this data so they can run up credit card bills in your name. They're not accessing this data, so they can send you spam emails. They're accessing this data because they want to manipulate it in some way to affect something that would be advantageous, if you believe the U.S. government's attribution of this case, to the Russian government. So what does that mean for us? What that means for us is we have to be really vigilant about whether our records are being, altered or not. And again, for those of you just joining us, I want to encourage you to send in any questions you have about this subject of, how can you check if Russia has tampered with your voter information on this or any other topics. You can leave comments in the comment section below or tweet to us at Technology. We always love getting a lot of questions. So for those of us who want to check whether our voter registration information has been tampered with, there are a couple of really important things to remember. Number one, the U.S. has a system of the secret ballot. It's kind of the foundation of of our electoral system. What that means is you're not going to be able to find a record of who you voted for, and there are obvious reasons for doing that. You want to prevent people's voting histories from getting out, and you don't want people to be intimidated or coerced into voting a specific way. So you're not going to be able to log onto any website and figure out, hey, did I really vote for candidate X, who I intended to, or was that changed? I should stress that there's no information that we have now that any actual votes were changed. So you can kind of leave that to the side for the moment, because there's just no evidence that occurred. What there is evidence of, and what this chart shows, is Russian attackers, alleged Russian attackers, tried really, really hard, and in some cases were successful in getting into the individuals and organizations on the right side of the screen here, which again are these state and local voter registration entities. And so what that means for you is most states, actually all states now, under federal law, have to have a statewide voter registration database. This is a cost-saving measure. It helps states track when people die or leave the state, but also it makes it very, very easy for voters to check to make sure that their voter registration information is valid. I can't stress enough how important this is. We're not in an electoral cycle right now, but it's an object of curiosity, and what you can do is you can go to your local, either Secretary of State is typically where it's held, and they'll have a website where you can register to vote, but there will also be a tab where you can enter in your information and determine, whether your voter registration information is still accurate. It's a very easy process. It involves you enter your name, you enter your date of birth, and driver's license number or other form of state ID. And what it returns is basically 4 data points: your name, your address, your party affiliation, and typically 1 or 2 other data points about how you've registered to vote. This is a really simple thing to do, and the thing that you're looking for is my name the same? Is my address the same? Party affiliation actually doesn't matter all that much unless you're talking about closed party primaries and things like that. So if you're inclined to do this kind of thing, I would say log on to your local Secretary of State's website, enter in that information, and just check to see if your name and your address are the same, because those are the kinds of things that hackers would target. And it's a little counterintuitive because you'd think, well, why are my name or my address important? That's not personally sensitive information. Lots and lots of individuals and organizations have that information. The reason it's important is these hackers, the goal of this attack, again, is not to steal money from you. The goal is to prevent you from voting and to block people from voting, or to make it harder, to make long lines, to create chaos at the polls, to convince us that maybe we can't trust our electoral system. So that's a really easy thing to do to check to see if your information is still valid. And while we're on the subject, what I really want to talk to you about, and again, for anybody who has any questions, please feel free to send those in the comment section or at Technology, which is our Bloomberg Technology page. I want to highlight a couple of stories that here at Bloomberg we did over the last year on this issue of election integrity. The first one I'll point out is actually a different one. It's this one. Some of you may remember this story we did about a year ago now. It's called Confessions of a Political Hacker. It's a pretty deeply reported profile. It took us months to put together on a Colombian hacker who's in prison for hacking elections, and he hacked elections, all throughout Latin America. And the reason I bring him up is one of the most resonant things that sticks with me as we were reporting this story is, we asked this guy, well, in the course of your hacking, did you do any actual vote hacking? Was that part of what your hacking operations, entailed? And by and large, they didn't. What we describe in the piece is, really extensive social media operations, disinformation operations, which we're all familiar with now, and as well, this voter registration hack was just enormously successful for them. What they would do is they would make it hard for people to vote by changing the exact information we're talking about here. Names and addresses can cause a lot of chaos in the electoral system. So we're getting some questions, thanks to those of you who are writing in. First question here is, what should we do ahead of the next election to protect ourselves? That's a good question, and I think that the simplest answer is checking that voter registration information, is really crucial, because what you don't want to have happen is you show up to the poll, and if somebody has changed your name or your address, again, those are the 2 key data points. It doesn't have to be the Russian military. It doesn't have to be, kind of some kingpin hacker. It could just be a hacktivist. It could be pranksters. But if you show up to your polling place and your name is not in the the electronic poll book, it's going to be a problem. I mean, you're likely still going to be able to vote provisionally. It means you fill out a paper ballot. But the kind of really unfortunate part about that is not only does that take longer, and it creates long lines at the polls. But also, those votes are not counted instantly. Those votes are counted days or weeks later, and they only really matter in the event of a really, really close race. So the results that you see, the instant results you see on election night, have nothing to do with your provisional ballot. So you kind of want to avoid that if at all possible. So check, again, go to your Secretary of State's website. It's super simple. You enter in, it's typically just your first and last name, date of birth, address, and then potentially some other identifying information, and it will return how you registered. That's the easiest thing to do. And that should get you pretty far down the road. Next question here is, what can the Comey revelations lead? Can the Comey revelations lead to a revote, or what's done is done? I'm not an expert on election law and things like that. I would highly doubt that there would be any sort of recounting of the votes. Especially at this point, because everyone we've talked to has said, the thing about this is all of the attacks we talked about earlier, they happened before the election. These were attempts, apparently, to either map the voter registration networks or tamper with the actual voter registration process. That has nothing to do with the actual votes, only insofar as that it affects people on election day. But actually, the voter registration problems we saw on election day, as far as we know, didn't have anything to do with hacks. They had to do with other kind of local issues, such as some critics have said voter suppression has been a big problem. I mean, some of these long lines that we've seen that have occurred, in some places in predominantly minority areas, those issues that were caused at the polls, in large part, were caused by policies that have nothing to do with hackers. So your best bet, again, in terms of the Comey revelations, I don't think we're going to see a recount of the votes unless some huge bombshell evidence, emerges that votes were actually tampered with. Next question here: if my voter data doesn't seem right, who do I tell? Well, this is the advantage of, if you're concerned about this issue, this is the advantage of going early, and going early to the Secretary of State's website. And in most states, it's kind of a neat process. A federal law passed some 15 years ago called the Help America Vote Act. Had a lot of prescriptions for electronic voting and things like that. And one of those mandates was that states need to set up these centralized, statewide online voter registration systems. And it allows states to track people, as I mentioned earlier, when they move or they die or whatever. And one of the advantages of that is it gives you a centralized place to go and check this information, and it also gives you a centralized place to change any inaccurate information. We've talked to people who've had errors. Some are innocent, some are not. In terms of errors that are not innocent, and you can get that changed. I mean, all it is just allowing a little bit of time for the states to communicate with the counties and transact that data. And I wanted to point to another story that we did not too long ago. This was a story about this electronic voting process. And the problem was, you could see there's kind of a tongue-in-cheek headline here. The problem with this system is not necessarily that hackers are manipulating the votes. The problem is that so much of our voting technology is old and it breaks. I mean, anybody who's had a laptop over, 2 or 3 years, you just know it slows down. It's not as good as it once was. The same is true of our voting technology. So, it's worth remembering as well that when you think about elections and you think about election hacking, this story was kind of more evidence that you need to place more emphasis on the front end, the voter registration side, because that's where the real mischief could occur. Because frankly, the errors that are attributed to this, we have ourselves to blame for it. We just haven't upgraded technology as fast as we should. Next question here is, how do you know if your voting station was compromised? Well, I would refer back to this story here. It's possible, it's definitely possible to hack voting machines. There's all kinds of research showing that that is indeed possible. But I'm a big advocate of, I wouldn't worry too much about it just because it's hard. And again, as well, if hackers can attack your voter registration information, that will create a lot more problems and it's a lot easier for them. But I'm a big advocate when it comes to electronic voting in terms of printed ballots. So it's a lot of these institutions now will offer you a receipt. So they will offer you a receipt of, I voted for this person. They won't have your name on it. They don't track things that way. But that's really valuable. You can ensure that the machine counted your vote correctly. And that's a really easy way to do it. But not all places have it. Memphis, Tennessee was the subject of this story, and they don't have that. And they have an election challenge right now where they can't recount physical ballots because they don't exist. So a lot of technologists will say it's good to have a mix of the new and the old in terms of paper ballot and electronic counting. Next question here is, how do you know if somebody voted using your name? Well, you'll know because you'll show up at the voting station and they will tell you you've already voted. That's what these electronic poll books do. They track who arrives and have they voted yet. So you'll know pretty quickly. And again, you'll get to vote provisionally until the state can sort it out or the county can sort it out. But it's not going to be as satisfying. So the idea of somebody voting as you is, as many of us know, I mean, voter impersonation fraud is an infinitesimally small problem these days. Next question here is, we're getting some great questions. Thank you for those of you who are tuning in. Was the Russian hack significant enough to actually change the outcome? Well, in theory, it could have been, but we don't have any evidence that it was. What Comey testified to today was, some aspects of, the Russian attack that we, that is outlined here, which is that the Russians were trying very hard to map, the networks of our electoral systems and figure out where can they affect the vote? Either, and it's not clear exactly, what the stated goal was, but, as history has shown us, obviously Donald Trump won the election, and there's an ongoing FBI investigation of possible collusion. So, in terms of tipping the election in favor of one thing or another, while the motivations might be clear, there's no technical evidence or any other kind of evidence to determine that any votes were tampered with. However, I should say, technologists are always fond of pointing out that just because the FBI director said, I've seen no evidence of vote tampering, doesn't mean there was no vote tampering. That just means he hasn't seen evidence of it. And in many cases, the reason you don't see evidence of something is nobody's looking for it, or they're looking for it in the wrong way. So I would take all of this with a grain of salt, but I would come back to the main point, which is, if you're going to see vote tampering, whether it's the Colombian election hacker who we talked about earlier, or what the Russians were, allegedly trying to do here, think about it less as the vote. There's too much emphasis on the vote itself. It's more about the voter registration part of it, which is what can create this snowball effect of, again, long lines and people not being able to vote on election day. That's far more powerful than tinkering with each individual vote, because it's just too hard as well. Another question here is, were Russians targeting specific voters or specific states? How did it work? Another good question. We don't have a lot of information about how these targets were picked. Knowing what I know about cybersecurity and hacking, and this military unit of the Russian military, these are expert hackers. They know exactly who they want to target and where. So my guess is that, when the names of the 122 individuals identified in this NSA report come out who were targeted, I suspect you would see clusters of states where it actually matters, it would matter to a national election. I mean, we all know, there are a handful of states in this country that really decide these elections, Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania, and a few others. So, my strong suspicion is that's where the attackers would target. Because, like I always like to say, if a hacker, decided to flip an entire state, and capture all those electoral college votes for one candidate or another, and let's say they flipped, a typically red state like Texas, and they flipped it from Trump to Hillary, like, everybody would know the vote was flipped and the vote was tampered with. That's not that effective. You want to target areas, where it would be more subtle. And that's one of the things the Colombian election hacker, kind of informed us about as well, is you don't want to do something in a state like California where it would just be obvious that there was tampering. So the short answer is we don't know yet, but I think we can all imagine it's probably in the handful of states that matter where these attacks were targeted in terms of the electoral college votes. Another question here is, wouldn't it be better if we all just voted with paper and pencil? So the answer to this may surprise you. As we were doing reporting on the voting technology story for Business Week, one of the things we heard over and over from technology experts, and you don't hear this in any other field of technology. You don't talk to computer scientists and have them tell you what they told us, which is they said, we've gone too digital with our elections. We've outsourced too much of this process to the computer. And again, these are computer scientists. These are people at the top of their profession in advancing the science behind computer technology. They're saying the problem is exactly what we described in the Memphis story in the previous piece, which is, if there's a challenge to the election and you don't have paper ballots to count, you're in for a world of hurt. I mean, that's a real problem, and it's a problem for democracy. And, it's worth repeating the old cliche, but, all politics is local. It's really true because, your local politicians decide so much about kind of what impacts your paycheck, what impacts your daily life. And if you're seeing tampering or if there are just problems, in general with the technology, you'll see it at the local level. And that's where some of these issues are occurring is, you want to have both. You want to have, it makes no sense to just count these things by hand anymore. Computer tabulation is very good and simple and easy. So I think the general consensus is you want to use digital tabulation. But you also want to have some sort of paper record so that you can go back to and you can physically count something in the event of a challenge. And we're all, may remember, the infamous images during the 2000, contest, the Bush v. Gore, issue. In the Supreme Court controversy where people are looking at hanging chads and this idea of did somebody punch the card hard enough to vote for that particular candidate. I've talked to a number of computer scientists who kind of, you kind of look back and you think, actually, that wasn't such a terrible system, because again, you do have a record. You have a permanent record of who voted for whom. We got some great questions today. I really want to thank you all for tuning in. This is a fun show, and hopefully we added some value to your day with all the news going on with Comey and the NSA leak earlier this week. We hope this gave you some valuable tips to at least investigate whether this potentially could have affected you at all. I suspect for most people it wouldn't have, but we want to empower you and give you some tips to go about your daily life, with some guidance here. So. As always, we'll see you next week. We're on Thursdays, typically at noon Eastern. Happy to take any questions offline as well. I'm on Twitter at JordanR1000, Jordan, the letter R 1000. And you can catch us on the Bloomberg.com/technology page, where we have links to my colleague Mark Gurman's show, as well as Decrypted, which is a great podcast that we do. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week on Digital Defense.